Since 1385, the kingdoms of Lithuania and Poland shared a dynastic bond. Władysław Jagiello unified their crowns, ruling both nations. His dynasty governed these lands for 2 continuous centuries. Despite this, each country maintained full independence. They had their own parliaments, laws, and armies. Only shared enemies and rulers truly bound them. By the mid-16th century, Lithuania faced dire challenges. Moscow posed the greatest threat. How would the Commonwealth arise? These rulers explicitly declared themselves the sole rightful claimants to all lands of the former Kievan Rus. The majority of lands under Lithuanian control were populated by Ruthenians. These were the ancestors of today's Ukrainians and Belarusians. Starting with Ivan II, Moscow's princes and czars consistently aimed to conquer these very lands. Their advance was characterized by the capture of cities like Kursk, Chernigiv, Gomel, Bryansk, Smolensk, and Vyazma. Ambitious Moscow Tsar Ivan IV the Terrible sought to seize Livonia. He then intended to continue his advance into the southeastern regions of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. By 1558, Muscovite forces had attacked and vanquished the Livonian Confederation. Soon afterward, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania resolved to prevent the complete absorption of its Livonian allies, thus taking action against the Moscow state. Consequently, the Treaty of Vilnius was finalized in 1561. As per this agreement, most of Livonia's lands were officially declared vassal dependent on the Lithuanian ruler, Sigismund II Augustus. Denmark and Sweden, too, became involved in this conflict, aiming to bring Livonia under their own control. Moscow's forces managed to capture Polotsk and its surrounding areas, yet the Lithuanian army successfully defeated them during the Battle of the River Ula. Nonetheless, after the Livonian War's initial years, it became apparent that the Lithuanian army was considerably outnumbered by the Muscovite military forces. Also, the principality's budget was considerably smaller than Ivan IV's. Furthermore, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania's southern regions often endured frequent attacks from incursions by Crimean and Nogai Tatars. As a result, Lithuanian officials requested assistance from the wealthier Polish kingdom. Moreover, Lithuanian Catholic and Protestant nobility had misgivings about their Orthodox Ruthenian citizens, who collectively made up more than 85% of the population. This was indeed reflected in the full name of the state, often referred to as the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Rus, and Samogitia. Uniting with the Kingdom of Poland would bolster the standing of Lithuanian Catholics. The concept of merging the two states gained support from Sigismund II Augustus, who served as both Grand Duke of Lithuania and King of Poland. Sigismund possessed no legitimate heirs to whom he could pass his titles and possessions. Hence, deeply concerned about both states' fate, he resolved to unite them through a strong alliance. The lower-tier nobility within the Grand Duchy of Lithuania also supported the union of both states. They greatly admired the rights and standing of Poland's minor and middle nobility. At that time, Polish nobles held almost full control over their nation, enjoying numerous privileges, and were considered formally equal to the great magnates. Conversely, in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, power was instead controlled by the aristocracy's highest echelons. Nevertheless, the Second Lithuanian Statute of 1566 granted new rights to the principality's minor and middle nobility, including the ability to send representatives to local Sejmics and the General Sejm of Lithuania. Sigismund II undertook this measure to mobilize the nobility, which constituted the majority of his Lithuanian army, in the face of the Moscow threat. The Polish nobility also desired to unite with Lithuania. Even so, they believed the union should happen through absorbing Lithuanian lands and distributing those to Polish landowners. The Polish aristocracy publicly announced their specific plans for the incorporation of Lithuanian territories into Poland during the joint Polish-Lithuanian Sejm in Warsaw. Prolonged negotiations between the nobility and state officials of both countries led to the convocation of the Polish-Lithuanian Sejm in Lublin during January 1569. Sigismund II invited nobility from both the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania to deliberate the conditions of a new union. The Polish side proposed the union based on a plan by Krakow Bishop Philip Padnewski. Under these terms, the plan was to establish a single bicameral parliament, to solely elect and crown the future state's king only in Poland, to form a joint treasury, and to progressively unify the legislation. The Lithuanian magnates responded negatively to the prospect of losing their aristocratic titles and becoming entirely equal in rights with the nobility. Therefore, in early March 1569, led by Mikołaj Radziwiłł, they secretly abandoned the assembly in protest. Meanwhile, the Polish side managed to secure full backing from Ruthenian nobility in Ukrainian lands, seeking identical rights to the Polish nobility. Encouraged by this support, Sigismund II Augustus promulgated a decree on the incorporation of the Podlaskie, Volhynia, Wrocław, and Kiev voivodeships into Poland. The union would be established based on the Polish proposal. All Lithuanian aristocrats who disagreed with this decision and would not swear allegiance to the king were to forfeit their lands. Fearing for their property and status, Lithuanian magnates returned to the Sejm. Nevertheless, their efforts to improve the union's terms in their favor proved futile. In June and July 1569, the final agreement terms was finalized and sanctioned by the Polish and Lithuanian Sejms. The union's terms projected the creation of a new federative state, namely, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This newly formed nation encompassed an area of nearly 880,000 square kilometers, establishing it as one of contemporary Europe's largest states. Formally, a single king served as its head, but the joint bicameral parliament, known as the Sejm, held the primary role. The upper chamber of this parliament, called the Senate, consisted of magnates, bishops, higher officials, voivodes, and castellans. The lower chamber, the House of Deputies, Izba Poselska, was comprised of representatives elected from local noble provincial assemblies. Solely, the Sejm possessed the power to pass laws, approve taxes, consent to declarations of war, and organize nobility mobilization for military service. Furthermore, without the Sejm's approval, the king could not even select a spouse for himself or his heir. This system of governance is sometimes termed a noble democracy or noble republic, yet in reality it constituted a noble oligarchy with a monarch at its head. Nevertheless, the king of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, though dependent, remained a highly influential political figure. For a period, he managed foreign policy, appointed or approved state and local officials, administered royal domains, convened the Sejm, and presided over the Senate. The Union of Lublin stipulated that the territories of Podlaskie, Volhynia, Kiev, and Wrocław voivodeships would be assigned to Poland. In these lands, certain Polish laws were enforced, and some Polish nobility relocated and assumed administrative roles. Notably, the population in these territories maintained the right to practice their own religion, utilize the Ruthenian language, and apply local laws in their daily and business lives. Per the Union of Lublin, the Polish crown and Lithuanian territories preserved their distinct governments, separate budgets, different armies, and some local law variations. Yet, a unified monetary system was established, and Polish-Lithuanian customs borders were abolished. Additionally, Polish and Lithuanian nobility gained permission to freely purchase land in both sections of the United States. King Sigismund II governed the United Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth for only a brief period. He passed away in July 1572. The nobility and higher clergy were then preoccupied. The task of electing a new king was underway. Two primary candidates emerged: Henry of Valois, younger brother to French King Charles IX, and Archduke Ernest Habsburg of Austria, who was the son of Emperor Maximilian II. In 1573, during the elective Sejm, the nobility ultimately selected Henry of Valois as their new monarch. Henry's selection was shaped by geopolitical circumstances. Due to the Habsburgs being embroiled in fierce conflicts with the Ottomans at the time, the Commonwealth nobles wished to avert a formidable new adversary on their southern borders. Concurrently, the Warsaw Confederation came into being during these meetings, with its delegates insisting on the implementation of legislation upholding religious tolerance. The subsequent endorsement of the Warsaw Confederation's stipulations briefly rendered the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth among the most tolerant European nations of that period. To obtain the Commonwealth's royal title, Henry promulgated the set of laws known as the Henrician Articles. These stipulations dictated that the election of every successive king would depend exclusively on the nobility, occurring only after the reigning monarch's demise. Furthermore, they secured authority over foreign policy. The monarch was obliged to fund the nobility's military expedition costs, and the aristocracies received the right to lawfully rebel against the king, or engage in a rokos. The long-standing freedoms and advantages previously afforded to the nobility remained intact. Additionally, another pact between the king and the aristocracy, referred to as the Pacta Conventa, was formalized. Pursuant to this understanding, Henry likewise had to individually discharge the Commonwealth's financial obligations, supply 4,000 Gascon soldiers, establish and sustain a Polish naval force in the Baltic Sea at his own charge, and subsidize the learning of 100 Polish scholars at the Sorbonne in Paris. In early 1574, Henry went to Poland and received his crown. Despite this, the 22-year-old Henry felt ill at ease in Poland. Constrained by many restrictions, he grew bored and was destined to wed the 50-year-old Anna Jagiellon. In June 1574, the newly crowned monarch of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth discovered that Charles IX had passed away. Henry promptly took this chance and covertly departed Poland to assert his right to the vacant French throne. The nobility grew furious and dispatched envoys to insist on Henry of Valois's return, but he declined to come back to the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth's nobility needed to reassemble the electoral Sejm to select a new monarch. On this occasion, the key contenders included Emperor Maximilian II, backed by the magnates, and Transylvania's ruler, Stephen Bathory, who garnered support from the middle nobility. Heated discussions resulted in armed confrontations among the proponents of both candidates, and the possibility of a civil war loomed. Nevertheless, Stephen and his adherents ultimately prevailed, leading to Bathory's proclamation as king in December 1575. This recently installed ruler demonstrated his capability as an adept commander. Under his command, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth's forces dealt substantial blows to the Principality of Moscow. Significantly, Bathory's contingent notably seized Polotsk and Velikie Luki, and after that initiated a siege of Pskov. These reverses, coupled with a looming Swedish incursion from the north and the Polish-Lithuanian army's push towards Chernihiv, obliged Ivan IV to yield and agree to the Truce of Yamzopolski in 1582. Pursuant to the pact, the majority of Livonia became Commonwealth territory, while Polotsk with its environs stayed under Stephen Bathory's governance, and a minor segment of the Gomel region was also handed over. Stephen Bathory endeavored to curb the overreach of the aristocracy and magnates, notably by directing the execution of the infamous nobleman Samuel Zborowski. Moreover, the ruler expanded the permanent military force and enlarged the role of Zaporozhian Cossacks, who proved crucial in guarding the new state's southern perimeters. Stephen's demise in December 1586 plunged the Commonwealth once more to the precipice of civil strife. Diverse noble and magnate groups backed differing contenders and failed to reach a consensus regarding the choice of a new king. The potency and spatial breadth of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth were further determined by its military successes. Feudal noble militias mainly constituted this state's armies, called up during conflicts at the monarch's and Sejm's instigation. Most nobles performed cavalry duty, also deploying their armed retainers. The Commonwealth's most powerful contingents were the winged Hussars, whose unique structures arose in the mid-16th century. Furthermore, a minor, standing professional infantry, known as the Quercian, was sustained via income from a quarter of the royal territories. Within the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the nobility stood as the preeminent social stratum, denoting the knightly or aristocratic class in these territories. Their count was projected to be between 6% and 9% of the entire state population. Noblemen were individually liberated and held many legal benefits. For instance, if they perpetrated a misdeed, a noble would solely be tried by their peers or the Sejm. However, noble justice often proved ineffectual, since transgressors frequently evaded retribution owing to the patronage of influential magnates. This fostered the emergence of punitive measures such as exile and disgrace in the Commonwealth. Disgrace would be exacted for severe offenses involving expulsion from the state, forfeiture of noble esteem, and all political prerogatives. The killing of an individual officially branded infamous could yield monetary compensation from the state. Noble feuds were a frequent occurrence among the aristocracy of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Furthermore, these disputes were legally allowed under specific circumstances. These combative noble clashes internally weakened the state and wrought considerable destruction, likened by contemporaries to the devastation caused by Tatar incursions. Solely the nobility and ecclesiastical dignitaries possessed full political rights, including the power to be chosen and to select representatives for parliament or local governance. The majority of other official roles were exclusively designated for noblemen. A comprehensive ideology eventually took shape, revolving around the nobility's superior status, and this was later termed Sarmatism. Per this ideology, nobles were regarded as the progeny of the Sarmatians, Europe's earliest knights, who had attained their superior standing through valor and distinctiveness from ordinary folk. Both legal and factual authority was exercised by the nobility over farmers dwelling on their lands. Farm laborers had to adhere to all directives from their masters and carry out corvée. Corvée involved the involuntary and unremunerated execution of specific duties by peasants for their lords. As of 1518, peasants no longer possessed the right to formally complain about their feudal lord's misconduct. The lord's absolute power over the peasantry created many opportunities for maltreatment, including arbitrary increments in corvée work and occurrences of sexual or physical aggression. Land ownership statistics also illustrated the noble aristocracy's power and position within the Commonwealth. Serfdom arrived somewhat later in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, governed by its 3 statutes. This institution prevented peasants from legally departing their lord's domain, taking away their freedom. Consequently, their existence was akin to that of enslaved people. Following the integration of the Volhynian, Kiev, and Wrocław voivodeships into Poland, feudal serfdom practices slowly spread to these regions. Yet, most local peasants remained in a more favorable position compared to those in the Ruthenian or Sandomier's voivodeships. Representing around 73% of the Commonwealth's inhabitants, peasants endured a notably difficult existence. This primarily arose from the aristocracy's growing authority, extending their control over the peasantry. Moreover, Europe was swept by the price revolution, leading to a swift creed goods and costs. Desiring greater access to new luxury goods, the nobility had to significantly raise the output from their farms. Consequently, the nobility confiscated uncultivated and peasant territories, while also expanding forced labor. Exporting rye and wheat proved to be the most lucrative business for the nobles. Throughout the 16th century, the Commonwealth's grain exports to European markets via Gdansk grew almost tenfold. During this era, corvée work in Lesser Poland intensified, growing from 1 day to 3 or 4 days each week. At the same time, peasants' and craftsmen's actual income dropped nearly threefold. By the close of the 16th century, nobility's average land profits were 19 times greater than peasants', mainly exploiting the latter's unpaid labor. Besides regular corvée or its financial substitute, other feudal exploitations were present. Peasants had to provide unpaid labor for upkeep of noble homes, castles, and roads, plus pay various feudal levies. The nobility also controlled various economic sectors exclusively. For instance, peasants could only mill their grain at noble-owned facilities or buy alcohol from noble taverns. Noble transactions, both sales and purchases, were tariff-free. Moreover, nobles could store their merchandise in urban depots at no charge. Poland-Lithuania's Commonwealth was one of Central Eastern Europe's most urbanized nations. Around 20% of the population resided in its diverse cities, which served as vital trade and manufacturing hubs. However, noble privileges and limits on peasant movement to urban areas impeded their growth. A considerable number of Commonwealth cities possessed self-governance, albeit with some limitations. The Magdeburg Law served as the prevailing model for these self-governing urban areas. However, unlike their Western European counterparts, these newly established state-cities had no parliamentary voice, nor substantial influence in state politics. The Commonwealth cities were centers where science and printing thrived, alongside establishment of educational bodies. Jews constituted a separate segment of the population, about 8 plumber distinct from nobility, clergy, and peasants. They valued the nation's religious tolerance and communal autonomy. They dominated much of both internal and external commerce, alongside moneylending. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth formed as an extension of the royal alliance between the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. This federated state featured a single king and a shared parliament, where the nobility wielded supreme authority. This governing structure was even dubbed noble democracy. Without robust central authority, the combative nobility's favored status often resulted in feudal wars and domestic unrest. At its inception, the Commonwealth stood as one of Europe's most religiously tolerant states, enjoying vibrant progress in science and literature. However, weak central power, growing feudal abuse of its populace, and border conflicts with neighbors menaced the state's future.